Welcome everyone to the 2021 Data Lecture Series. I want to give a special thanks to our speakers committee, without whom we would not be able to have our Friday speakers who we are able to listen and learn from. This week we have the benefit of listening to Katina Bitsicas, who is a friend of mine from the University of South Florida. Katina is a new media artist who utilizes video, photography, performance in her artworks. She uses these mediums to explore personal loss and trauma and the theme of bringing back to life while the afterlife is still looming near. She has exhibited worldwide, including the Armory Show in New York, Pulse Art Fair in Miami Beach, Here Art in New York, and Art in Odd Places in Orlando. She received her BA from Kalamazoo College, a postbac from SACI in Florence, Italy, and an MFA from the University of South Florida. She's an assistant professor and coordinator of the digital storytelling at the University of Missouri, where she also concludes research with the MU School of Medicine on utilizing digital storytelling as a meaning-making intervention for bereaved family members. Without further ado, if everybody wants to give a warm welcome to Katina Bitsicas. Welcome, Katina.
Yay. Thank you all so much for coming. I appreciate you taking up your lunch hour here on a Friday to come listen to me talk a little bit. I also wanted to thank Emily Elliott for inviting me to speak today and share a little bit about my artistic practice. So this presentation will walk you through two of my most recent bodies of work called Revive and MCL. And then I'll highlight some of my collaborative works then towards the end. So before I begin, I'd like to give notice that some of my work may be difficult for some viewers to look at, and I will not be offended if you feel the need to take a break from my presentation or if any emotions just become too strong at any point. So thank you again, and we'll start. So I wanted to show you and start by with an early work of mine to give you an idea of where I began. So I consider this work called Lifeline one of the first works where I started to develop my own visual language and style, and that is still visible in my work today. So Lifeline features a book that's comprised from a brainwave scanner paper that was found actually in an abandoned hospital in Italy. This book was filled, the handmade artist book was filled with quotes from the MMPI and photographs of these explorations. So I utilized red thread that you see here on the table to represent a direct connection from the book to the projection of my mouth. That was kind of sewing together my mouth. And as I unraveled the threads, it helped to enable my voice. So the use of red thread, white cloth, visual pain, appropriated materials, and mental trauma continues to ground the work that I make today. So the first body work I'd like to share with you today is called Revive. In the summer of 2019, I attended an artist residency in Vicksburg, Michigan called the Prairie Ronde Artist Residency. And I found this residency actually by first Googling abandoned places residency and then Michigan artist residency, realizing that I wanted to make work a little bit closer to home at that point, since at the time my father had been recently diagnosed with cancer. Lo and behold, I found that I struck gold when I found this residency because it actually took place in an abandoned and currently being renovated paper mill. And these are just some images that I took inside the mill. I began this body of work, much like my other works, where I explored with my camera around this ginormous and beautiful property. However, I was not only inspired by the peeling paint and state of disrepair, but also by the sense of hope and the sense of knowing that this huge, ginormous, cavernous building would soon be brought back to life, back to its pride and back to its glory. And it would be saved, it would be preserved. And unlike the other abandoned buildings that I captured in some of my older work, this building was actually to be revived and repurposed. So I began collecting natural objects around Vicksburg, which is the town where this mill was located, and I contrasted them against the peeling floors of the mill, showing that history can be preserved and something beautiful would come of this. So these are just some stills from that series. So I saw the mill as a metaphor for giving new life into something that was once broken. This is what led me to create this body of work, which I mentioned called Revive. So actually a little story behind this series. One of my undergraduate research students here at Mizzou, which is actually coincidentally, it's called the Art of Death Research Team. She approached me one day after 2 years of working with her and told me that she wanted me to have her tattoos. I asked her, like, what do you mean by you want me to have your tattoos? She said when she died, she wanted me to she wanted her tattoos to be cut off and then preserved. And she wanted me to have them because she knew that I would do something cool and artistic with them. So I thought that was a little weird at first, but then you have to realize that this student, her name is Lucy Cook, is actually the recipient of 3 heart transplants. So she had these transplants at the ages of 11, 23, and 28. She is now 32 and she's currently finishing in her senior year at Mizzou and has a fear of wasting time since she's not a candidate for a 4th heart transplant. And so she's been given about 2 to 5 years to live. So because of this, I suggested, well, why don't we just make work together now while you're still alive? So conversation about the trauma and PTSD involved with heart transplant patients is seen as taboo. And she has been told numerous times that she should just be grateful to be alive. So through direct collaboration with Lucy, I aim for this body of work to create room to discuss these issues and to provide Lucy the ability to reclaim her traumatizing hospital experiences. Heartbeat, which is the work that you see shown here on the screen, features 3 wire sculptures made from found medical and industrial objects, with each, with each sculpture representing a different heart. Each one of these sculptures has various objects collected and tied onto it, resembling an industrial lit shrine dedicated to her. These wires were found inside the mill. Here's a close-up where you can see some of the vials with the lake water and various natural materials. Please Don't Forget Me pairs a journal entry found next to Lucy's living will, which will be broken down into each recipient of her possessions. So she wrote down everything that she had and she wrote down who she would want each of those possessions to go to. And then this journal entry that I found was paired with a visualization of her heartbeat. As I began sort of digging deeper into all of these documents that Lucy possesses, right, as part of this archive of her experience, I found 2 letters which they have redacted information from her donors' mothers. So they're both letters from the 2 of the first 2 hearts of the mothers of those donors. And then the last one is her actual living will. So Lucy also describes how each of the donors' hearts feels different and has a different personality depending on the donor. So this is actually explored in this film that I'll show you an excerpt from called Lucy the Girl with 3 Hearts. This film is divided into 3 sections, 1 for each donor, and visually reflects the feeling and location of each heart.
I was 11 when I started noticing complications. Really, I must have felt bad for some time before what I'm about to tell you, but this is when it's most vivid in my mind. It was roller skating day in gym, which is like the coolest, most special day. I lived in Iowa, in rural Iowa at the time, and I was roller skating, and I felt like a lot of pain in like my diaphragm area, so like right below your rib cage. And I had been roller skating around the rink with my friends, and then there were like big wrestling mats laid out on the side in case you wanted to like rest. I fell onto the mat because the diaphragm pain got so bad. I got nauseous. I went to the nurse's office and just like puked, and then that night I went to the doctor in my hometown. They did like a They did like an EKG with this really archaic machine. And then they sent me to the hospital that night in Iowa City, and that's when they found out that I had heart failure.
So I just wanted to mention too for this project, it's quite a variety of materials that were used, everything from a toy camera called a Heronzumi to a old footage that Lucy had recorded herself from these video diaries that she created. And then the interview that I conducted with her, in addition to actually the music that Lucy composed herself because she's a musician. So it was quite kind of a collaborative effort as well. And this project itself, I enjoyed creating because it actually went back to some of the older style work I used to make where it was more documentary style audio paired with more artistic visuals. So the next piece, Patchwork, this displays the beauty and trauma by compiling images of Lucy's scars and bruises from her transplants into a patchwork quilt and audio of her heartbeat. So in the intruders, which some of the sculptural elements are seen here on the screen, is a series of hospital masks that are embroidered with spewing red thread that trails from the mouth, representing a longing for connection to the outside world during isolation. But it is also a reclamation of the trauma of the unidentified masks during procedures that she would always encounter. The red threads resembles the multiple PICC lines that physicians would place in her, but there was rarely any verbal communication. So by removing the masks and kissing them on the forehead, she's reclaiming the traumatizing medical experiences as well as forming a personal connection. As a side note, I find this work interesting because this was made pre-COVID. And so it's just interesting to think about how this work can also speak to today's times about like lack of communication and usage of masks. And so it almost puts in a completely different context now compared to when I originally made this work. So this work has been installed a couple of different ways with the sculpture and then the video on the monitor, but also projected as well. And this is an excerpt from the video. And so this action is repeated throughout the video of her removing the masks and kissing each of the individuals on the forehead. So I actually had a conversation after making some of this works with Lucy, asking her what parts of her story she thought were missing. So I see each of these pieces as telling a portion of that story, of her overall collective story. So she said that the parts about recovery and how she healed from this experience should be explored more. And two techniques that she utilized in order to help her to recover were traveling and body suspension shows. So in this work called Reclaim, this features 4 hanging fabric sculptures suspended by small hooks and red thread. So for Lucy, body suspension is a way to reclaim this medical trauma. So the multiple needles that have pierced her skin and the masked doctors that have confronted her and the numerous wires that have been connected to her body are replicated in this space where she has control and can reclaim these experiences. There's an emotional release during this, and the sculpture reflects this release through the flowing forms within nature and by utilizing gravity to create these graceful shapes. The hooks are delicate and placed with care, and the red thread serves as a line of connection, bonding her with the outside world. And here's just some close-ups. And I forgot to mention each one of these different sort of organizations of hanging, each one is a specific suspension body art position that you can be suspended within. So Lucy also, as I said, explained to me how traveling helped her to heal. So this project Float is created from a series of videos she recorded while swimming abroad in Germany. And then these were edited and reprojected onto water and then re-recorded. So I find that the weightlessness of this video onto water reflects this healing process for her. So this is just a still. And then this video was also, I made it into a single channel version instead of the projection map version, where I re-recorded the recording projected onto the water and then combined it with the original video again, but it was completely manipulated and edited to then create this. So after creating all of these works, which were comprising these different elements of Lucy's story, I felt that actually a book would be the best way to display her cumulative experience to the viewer. So this book, Lucy the Girl with 4 Hearts, was constructed from archival material, writings, and photographic documentation of video and sculptural works that I created. So the following few images are a selection of spreads from this book. And this first spread that you see here is a timeline which utilizes her real heartbeat, and that gives insight to some of these main life events. So I know it's probably a little bit hard to read. And so each one just shows the date and then kind of these key events throughout her, her sort of medical journey. The second spread pairs a journal entry that she wrote with a photograph after a BDSM session, along with poetry underneath that. And that says mark making, a purposeful reclaiming of the flesh, asserting control. So this spread is a photographic documentation of Lucy waiting for her second heart transplant. So there's sort of different series of different medical complications that came about with each transplant. So in addition to her many tattoos that you've probably seen in these videos so far, Lucy also has a large scarification. And these photos are documentations of this. And that's shown in a diptych with a poem that she wrote. So this final spread pairs a document of her post-heart transplant instructions from the doctor with edited stills from this underwater exploring. And some of these should look familiar from the float work. And just to give you an idea, the entire book itself is around 196 pages. So there's many different stories that are kind of explained, but don't have time to go through the whole thing. Okay. So the next body of work, which is my most recent, is titled MCL. So we're kind of shifting gears here a little bit. So in 1973, my mother and father met for the first time at Northwestern Michigan College in Traverse City, Michigan. Their love blossomed, and they actually dropped out of college and moved to Hawaii to live an adventurous life together. My mother was 19 at the time, my father was 21. So they eventually came back to Michigan, married, and then I was born. So fast forward a little bit, and in 2017, the day after Christmas, my father was diagnosed with stage 4 mantle cell lymphoma at the age of 63. Since I lived in Missouri and still do live in Missouri, I was unable to visit when he was first diagnosed and felt guilt about not helping to carry the weight of being a caregiver with my mother, especially since I'm an only child. He fought a tough battle, but 2 months ago, that's not right, but 6 months ago, he passed away at the age of 65. Due to COVID-19, trials for the potentially life-saving CAR-T cell therapy had ceased. 1 month after he passed away, the FDA approved this as the first cell-based gene therapy or treatment of mantle cell lymphoma. It just came 1 month too late. So backing up a little bit, so this work was made around the time when he was first diagnosed. So in an effort to see how red thread can be used as a symbol for connection, this piece, Forward Progress, let me start the animation. This piece, Forward Progress, maps the journey from where I currently reside to my father's home via an animated red line that you see on the right-hand side of the screen, drawing of a map. Since I was unable to visit him throughout his initial treatments, the line represents the journey I would have taken and the thread that still connects us regardless. The installation features 2 panels of hanging coarse cloth that you can see here. And they're separated from each other. And then this animation is then projected through the fabric and then goes to the wall, creating 3 distinct images. The panels are very sterile and represent the room divisions of a hospital. And each of the 3 panels represent each member of my family unit, my mother, my father, and myself. By projection mapping onto these panels, I am able to bring hints of his room and a sense of connection to my current location in order to help me process these diagnoses and treatments. This piece, MCL to NSSI, is a series of 3 small embroideries that are in sequence from left to right. The first is representing mantle cell lymphoma, the type of uncurable cancer my father was diagnosed with. The second is the embroidery of that line that we saw just a second ago from that animation in Forward Progress, which symbolized that link between us, placed in the center. And then the third is an embroidery of my own coping mechanism for trauma. So this piece, which is a projection mapped video onto a large willow tree, is called Inexorable. And this piece is inspired by the willow tree itself, which I see as a metaphor for the strength of my father. Even though there were many obstacles thrown his way, he was still able to continue on and remain strong until the end. Microscopic videos of cancer cells multiplying are projected onto this willow tree, attempting to overtake it, but this tree still stands strong throughout. And then here's some documentation photos of that. And then you can see the documentation video. Oops. So this work, DRIP, reflects on the disorienting and reflective nature of the chemotherapy regimen. When I was actually able to go to that residency in 2019, the other work that you just saw that was on the willow tree was created a different residency right after the other one, which was also in Michigan. So I was actually able to then start being with my father for some of his treatments. So by distorting and replicating footage of my father's chemo drip, I aim to put the viewer in the same disorienting headspace in order to create empathy. The audio is a recording of his hospital room that has been manipulated to reflect on the environment and process. The video is then projected onto an array of tubing and drip bags that are what helped keep him alive, but at what physical cost? My goal is to let the viewer into the world of someone who's going through these types of treatments, which are painful, confusing, and a repetitive process. So this is like a documentation still. And this is a documentation video of the installation. Ooh. So when COVID-19 shut down my university and pretty much all the universities across the country in March, I was able to travel home to my father for 4 months and take on the role of caretaker until he passed. When I first arrived, we were told that the cancer had spread to his brain, creating an almost dementia-like effect. I continued to document my father through his last days, all the way to the crematory a week after his passing. So I began this body of work in 2018 to work through my father's actual cancer diagnosis. I aim for these works to show both the mental effects of chemotherapy as well as the strength of the individual to persevere. My goal was to create empathy for both the patient and the caretaker. This body of work then shifted to something so deeply life-changing that continuing to create became difficult. I intend to add on to this body of work and to peel back the curtains on the grieving process through cremation by providing a matter of fact and inside perspective on what happens to the body after it expires. I created an Instagram profile titled Farewell Father that documented my father's journey throughout his last days. This is where I posted a daily journal with a photograph and a writing excerpt. Some days the writings were longer, some days they were shorter. But just as a side note, it was interesting to kind of go back through some of these and to actually help me to remember some of these experiences. So similarly to the book I created with Lucy, I want to create another book with this Instagram being the starting point. I feel that there's not much information given to caretakers as they undertake such a heart-wrenching and difficult experience. And it would be my goal to transform these writings and photographs into a book that could be informative for other caretakers that are about to take on this journey. I will just, as a forewarning, a couple of these photos coming up are a little bit difficult to see maybe. So after my father passed, I followed the cardboard box that housed his body to the crematory and pushed the small green button to begin the incineration. My action, a simple push, eliminated the last recognizable form of my father and his physical presence on this earth. And this is a photo of him actually at the funeral home. And this is actually, they actually allowed me to go to the crematory, and it's part of the Hindu religion actually, to be able to follow the body to its last moment and to be allowed to start the process. So I found that very fascinating and just had to document the entire process. And I found that documenting these is the only way that I was able to kind of cope at that time. So I also wanted to highlight a few other works, and these all revolve around the theme of memory, but they all have a collaborative component, whether it be with dancers or musicians. So we're sort of switching gears again here. But I thought maybe it'd be helpful for you guys to see, especially as students, how wide of a net you can kind of cast when it comes to collaborating with others in your artworks. So this work, Peripheral, began as a dive into the work about the red thread itself, which is a common material that I use throughout my work. Peripheral represents the thoughts that come and go from our subconscious minds, and the red line that you see comes in and out of focus, symbolizing fleeting thoughts. The lines are organized like neurons and flash as if a synapse is firing. The thread can also be seen as a noose, reflecting on how thoughts of death may enter and leave our minds when we're in a state of reflective thought. And here's what the actual video looks like. So the video I'm about to show next. So this piece then actually transformed into a collaborative performance and music composition that was choreographed in Greece as part of this festival called Eyes Walk Festival. And so this accompanied this projection of Peripheral on an old jail on the island of Syros in Greece. And so the actual choreography and music composition was arranged around the movement of the video that I created. So this next project, Disjointed Fragments, is a collaboration between myself, Carolina Arita, who performed the music, who composed the music, Gisela Cruz, who choreographed and performed the dance, and the ensemble Verdant Vibes, who commissioned and performed the composition. This work premiered at Brown University and included live video switching performed by myself. So conceptually, this project explores the range of emotions from a single human, from extreme intensity to nostalgia, to passion, to loss and longing. The work is constructed in two opposing sections, as well as an intro and outro. So you can see it's a 3-channel projection, and then the ensemble is in the middle there. The first section, Nostalgia, draws from feelings of the past and reminisces on close people from before, as well as memories of good feelings. This blissful section suddenly spirals out of control and enters a loop feedback, which becomes saturated. As the next section, Ecstasy, begins, the viewer then feels the disconnection from what is considered reality and can't recognize their surroundings. This sensation dissolves towards the end, and then the viewer is brought back to a version of its original place. This is a state of euphoria that becomes overflown, with everything ending in silence and dark. So this is a still of the dancer and one of the projection screens. And then here's an example of with the music. And again, this is just excerpt. So the last piece that I wanted to talk to you guys about is called 1422, 1829, 1702, which are the house numbers for my grandmother's, my mother's, and my own house, respectively. So this work went through many iterations, and I will go through those with you. But this work is a performative video that explores the memories associated with physical locations of my past, present, and future. More specifically, I'm utilizing feet, both figuratively and literally, as a unit of measurement to navigate through my grandmother's, mother's, and then my own home. Every carpet, rug, wood panel, tile, and floor covering is meticulously measured as I pace each inch with my feet. As I walk these homes, the floor plans become permanently ingrained in my memory, inch by inch, solidifying the connection between my family and I, no matter the distance. Each home segment can be seen as a parallel world to where I currently am, and reminds me that my past and present will always be a part of me heading into the future. So this is a still of when it was shown as a single projection at the Satellite Art Fair, which was in New York. And the interesting thing about this project, like I was saying, it has lived many lives, right? So originally pre-COVID, this piece, as you see it right here, and I can actually start playing the video. So originally this pre-COVID piece was performance for the camera, where I recorded and then edited the performances together and displays a projected single channel video. Since COVID, this piece has actually been performed 3 different times on various virtual platforms, from Instagram Live to Twitch to this other actually Chinese streaming platform that I can't remember the name of right now. And it's also been performed for various festivals and exhibitions. So it switched to this single channel to this actual live stream performance. So this piece has also existed as a collaborative Zoom performance as well, where I invite the viewers to perform the same measuring action in their own domestic spaces, utilizing their feet simultaneously with mine. Did I freeze? That's weird. Sorry, the video froze there for some reason. So I'll just, I guess, pause for a second to show you what the first iteration of the video looked like. So this project took on yet another iteration, now just called 1829, which is a performative video that of both my mother and myself tracing and measuring this childhood home with my feet. So I performed this original walk pre-pandemic when we were all able to kind of visit each other in order to ingrain that floor plan into my mind and solidify this connection with my physical space. But now that we were distant from each other, my mother performed the same walking action 2 years later. The space has changed, and with my father's passing, the people have also changed too that inhabit this space. But the floor plan remains the same steady material thing, grounding us and uniting my mother and I from afar. These two performances are blended together to display that unity, and this audio is a haunting track of distant memories that these walls contain. I see this as a collaboration between my mother and I. And so this project is actually still a work in progress, and there's other elements that I'm planning on incorporating to make it into a projected installation with other videos kind of projected on top of it to create this kind of even more layered effect to it. So that's all I have for you. And thank you very much. I didn't show all the videos in their entirety, so you can check them out on my website, katinabitsicas.com, or I also post a lot of my stuff on Instagram as well, just at katinabitsicas. So thanks so much for listening, and I think Emily will open it up for questions.
Yes, we will. I want to thank you again for taking the time to speak with us today. Is there any initial questions off the bat that anybody has to get us started? I know this is all kind of new work. I haven't even seen a lot of this work other than you know, a couple of images here and there on Instagram. Come on, guys, you're all participants in my seminar class. So part of your job, again, was to actively participate in the lectures, have questions ready for people. So who's got one?
I have a question.
Yes.
So, when you collaborate with Lucy, for example, how is the process of creating? Like, do you listen to her stories and then come up with ideas, or do you both have like ideas of what the visual will look like?
Yeah, so I would say the collaboration with her functions a bit different from those collaborations I showed at the end. With her, she pretty much gave me like a huge, I mean, I can't even tell you how many files worth of stuff and pages worth of information, all of her medical documents, everything, like I literally have. I mean, I have a whole pretty much lifetime worth of material from her. And so it's more on that kind of collaborative side where she gave me kind of, not, I won't say free reign, but the ability to utilize her materials in making work. because I know her and I knew her too. I mean, I knew her story. And every project though I run, like after I complete something, I run it, you know, by her before it's ever displayed, because it's her, you know, it's her story. So I want to make sure I'm you know, accurately representing it. But as far as like the actual ideas and creation of the visuals, those are all mostly pretty much coming from me. And I have the starting point though, usually the seed of the idea is coming from her story or some sort of archival material that she's given me.
So would you say that the collaborative process is more of like the initial getting to know that person and getting to know their story?
Yes.
And then that essentially that person like giving you permission to tell that story?
Yeah. So I wouldn't be making this work about her if I hadn't already had 3 years of rapport building with her, right? It's not like I met her one day and was like, okay, let me just like make all this really personal work about you and you know, share all the story with her. No, I mean, I befriended her, became, I mean, not because of this, it was for other reasons. But you know, I got to know her. I learned, you know, her personality. We had lots of common interests, and you know, there was lots of rapport building before I just, you know, jumped into making this work about her. And the sort of impetus and idea to make work about her story came from her, right? She was the one that wanted her story to be told. And she had previously, you know, been aware of my aesthetic, aware of my interests, and thought that I'd be a good person to tell that story.
Right, excellent. And another question from you guys.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I'm on a phone. So when did you like discover you enjoyed collaborative work?
Yeah. Let's see. So for the most part, I'm trying to think, in graduate school, I didn't really make any collaborative work that I can remember. And I started collaborating more so on the research end of it. So as Emily kind of said in the beginning of my bio, the whole other half of, well, not half, probably about quarter of what I do is I do research with the School of Medicine at Mizzou, where different participants who have recently lost somebody go through these, and they're all caregivers, go through these bereavement workshops where I facilitate to help them make meaning of their own stories and of their own losses, right? And all of that research is totally collaborative. And it's really interesting because I started all that research even before my father, before Lucy, before all of that. And so it became interesting that that's now what my work kind of became about, right? But anyway, so I realized that there was this real power in working collaboratively, and most research teams in academia are collaborative, right? And I'm like, well, why aren't a lot of artists aren't typically working in that way? Like, we're very hunkered down in our own studios and our own thing. But I realized in order to be more exposed to other people's stories, I had to be more collaborative. And I also realized that hooking up with these musicians and you know, dancers and choreographers, it adds a different sort of dynamic element to my work. And also the ability to do live performance that isn't just performance art became really interesting to me too. So the fact that, so for example, that performance at Brown, where it was like the 3-channel video projection, that's billed as or advertised as a like music ensemble concert, right? But yet you attend it and it's all these different like audiovisual elements. And I had never actually performed video art, if that makes sense. So like I had my keyboard, I was literally live switching and like playing my computer with the videos as the musicians play. So it was something completely unique that had I not, you know, opened up to working collaboratively, I would have never experienced. But you had to find the right collaborators too. That's the
Well, and yeah, again, I mean, going back to sort of like telling Lucy's story, it's like that's 3 years of rapport building, and then her actually saying, "Hey, do you want to tell my story?" Because I think oftentimes, especially if you're talking about things like the subject matter that you talk about with your work, which is a lot of grief and trauma and sort of healing and from grief and trauma, like that could very easily fall into the realm of exploitative. So I think it takes a very special type of person and a very broad view of collaboration in order to even do that. I mean,
Yeah.
you even like dipping your toes in that pool is like pretty courageous.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit like how you started to think about the process of how to do that and do it right.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, so like all of the videos for on my research side of that all my participants make, I can't show those. I don't show those. I mean, it's all IRB protected. Like there's no way I could ever share those with anybody outside of like our conference presentation or research. That is, yeah, so that's kind of a completely different thing. But with Lucy and her story, so I was very careful from the very first time I made something to show her every single step of the way. Like, are you okay with this? I checked in with her every single time. Like, are you still comfortable with this? And honestly, towards the end, and I probably in retrospect should have done this sooner, but I did. She has signed, a form that, was so like legally signed saying that I'm releasing, the ability to me to tell my story so that I won't be sued, right? Something I should have done much earlier, I think, in the process after working on this for 2 years. I'm like, wait a minute, we haven't signed anything. Like, but once I created the book and started sending it to publishers, I'm like, okay, it's time to get just a little paperwork in here. And that's just to protect both of us, right? If you're a student, I would definitely do that much sooner in the process than when I did it. I just trusted her because I knew her. I mean, the biggest thing to not feel, I mean, sometimes even like with the work with my father, right, which is my own dad, I felt sometimes like, I'm like, am I exploiting this? And I, especially with those 3 photographs. So this is just a personal story, but when I was, those 3 photographs, I ended up submitting to a show in New York, and they're actually on display right now in New York. And I was really hesitant. I almost didn't submit it. And I was like, you know what, I'll just ask my mom. And so I felt like I'll ask her. So I was like, and I was so nervous, like, and I have a pretty, as you can probably tell, decent relationship with my mother. And I just was like, what's she going to say? I don't want to upset her. Cause my biggest thing was like, I don't want to, but I asked her for permission. And every single time I show those works, I ask her permission still. So even though it's just as much my dad, it's her story too that's being put out there. So I'm just, you can never ask, I guess you can never ask too many times, right? And then you become more comfortable showing, I think showing the work as well.
Could you speak a little bit specifically about that transition, sort of going from telling other people's stories to sort of like then switching to using these tools and these processes of your research, and then kind of having to turn it inward
Yeah.
during that process? Because I know it's like everybody grieves differently. So it just so happens that, like you said, that these were your coping mechanisms. This was the only way to process. So
Yeah. So it's actually interesting, which maybe Emily too, a little bit about this, but when I first started my body of work in grad school, it was actually very much so about me and about my own sort of trauma and other sorts of things that we won't get into right now. And so it was very much so about me. And but I didn't feel like I was doing a very good job of making that connection to the viewer, making it more on this, I don't want to say global scale, but making this more open to other forms of interpretation. And then about halfway through grad school, I started switching about making work about a really close friend of mine who had murdered somebody when I was in grad school. And so I then started making my work a lot about his story. And the dynamics with that are completely different than with Lucy. And actually I ran into a lot of, I got a lot of, not backlash, but because of the privilege that I have compared to somebody who's incarcerated, there's a completely different dynamic there, right? About why do I have the permission to tell this story? Why do I, and I mean, I still write to him today, right? Like, I mean, I just got a letter from him last week. So there, I mean, there is still that contact, but there's that lack of control that he has over the situation, right? And then similarly to when a friend of mine actually right after that was then murdered, I actually also got a lot of backlash because who am I to tell her story since she has no say over because she's no longer alive, right? So I think that with Lucy, even after she passes, and I knock on wood, I mean, she's doing great right now too, by the way. She's like, even though she was only supposed to live 2 to 5 years more, she's doing great. So I will feel okay and that I have the permission to continue to tell her story after she passes, right? Because I've been doing this all along and she's granted me that permission, right? But I do understand sort of the situation that existed with some of the earlier work that I was making that maybe wasn't as ethical as, and that's why I'm now, trying to make, do a better job of that. Even though my intentions were always in the right spot, I could see from looking from the outside in how some of that could be, questioned. I don't know if that answered your question, but so then I moved from, you're saying going from, so I kind of already was making personal work and then making work about other people and then going back to personal and then now doing this more collaborative and then now going back to personal again.
Well, and it's sometimes it's hard to, especially when you're in grad school, have the confidence to think that like work that is personal can also be sort of understood by sort of a macro level audience. It's like we have the critiques with our advisors and stuff, and they ask the exact right questions that like get in our heads, and then it can change the work you make for an entire year after that. So yeah, I think it is sort of a natural thing to sort of go and visit back the things that like you were making. So I think it's just interesting that like you started the research that you do at Mizzou on sort of grief and bereavement. It's almost like the universe preparing you in a way.
Yeah, and it actually, so interestingly enough, I mean, it enabled me, I think, to help both myself and my mother kind of through the process as well. I mean, she hasn't like formally gone through one of my workshops or anything, but I was, I think, able to have the right, or at least I like to think I had the right words at maybe a time when those words were more challenging. So I think it helped in that aspect. And I want to say, I mean, it did start more as using this for trauma purposes, which I had made work on before, but not specifically bereavement. I hadn't really made much work on before. So.
Well, since I have pretty much my seminar group, and we're going to do a discussion later, we're going to be doing a discussion on rituals of preparation. And sort of this idea of a thing that you do to sort of prepare yourself for creating. So I guess my final question that I'll pose to you before I let you go is, do you have any creative rituals?
Oh man, I wish. No. So, I mean, if I'm being 100% open and honest with you, since leaving grad school, I'm pretty much only able to make fully complete bodies of work when I'm at a residency. So I do, well, pre-pandemic, it was much easier to do residencies. So I usually do like 1 or 2 residencies a year. And that's where I like completely focus on making that body of work. And usually the sort of landscape or place in which the residency is located somehow influences the work as well. So most of the work that you actually saw was made at a residency. That being said, there are pieces obviously that weren't made, like the walking floor ones weren't made, at a residency. But I find my work is so emotionally draining to make that I can't, since I teach and do research full time too, I can't do that. And then also like flip a switch and be like, oh, hi to my students, like, let's talk about it. You know, like I just can't do it. And so I carve aside that time. And if it's not a residency, I at least carve aside, you know, a solid, you know, few days that are linked together where I know I don't have any meetings, no, I don't have any whatnot. The other thing too that really helps me is I find either I get a commission or I find a deadline for a show that's coming up, and I make a piece of work for that specific thing, knowing that I have that deadline in my head, knowing that I'm making something for a purpose. So this is kind of funny, but that work, the walking feet one, that was initially made for, and I think you said that Jason Lazarus talked to your class, right?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
he spoke to the Donna community last semester.
Oh, okay. So maybe you guys remember his lecture. I don't know if he talked about this at all in his thing, but he did a show called Rulers a couple years ago. Do you remember that? So that piece was actually initially made for that show. I was like, oh, I don't do anything with rulers. I was like, well, let me just think about, I was like, well, I could use, you know, feet as a measuring tool. And then it just developed. And then now it's been shown as like all these different live virtual performances, all these different, like that work has had so many different lives. So I'd say like to kind of shorten what I just said, I would say, you know, residencies are super helpful if you want to make a large body of work in a condensed period of time. Carving out time within your normal schedule where you can just focus on your work is helpful. Also finding deadlines and, you know, or things that are specific deadlines so that you can make a body of work for something specific helps you actually get it done. So those are my tips.
I think, I mean, I've never done a residency, but I definitely believe in like forcing yourself to have a deadline.
Yes.
Like literally making it happen, and then you have no other choice. And then, yeah, I had no idea that started as part of the rulers thing. Because, yeah, so oftentimes, and you guys will sort of see this when you apply to shows, oftentimes they have some vague theme that you're supposed to fit work in. And you'll look at all of these opportunities that are out there and you'll think, oh, well, my work isn't about that. I can't apply to that. Don't sell yourself short. Like you can literally just try to make work about that for one instance. And you know, like Katina said, you never know where it's going to take you or what different iterations it will lead to. So I mean, like the worst thing you can do is not do it.
Yeah. I'll tell you this. I mean, so when I first made that piece for this, and I mean, and it wasn't like a huge show or anything, right? The ruler show. And I was like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever made, is what I first thought when I made it. I was like, this is ridiculous. But I was like, you know what? It kind of looks cool. I'll submit it. That piece then got me the show for Performances Alive, which is at Satellite Art Fair in New York. And then I got invited to Performance Live at Art Basel to show a different piece because of that piece. And so like, you don't even know like what kind of, and then I got interviewed for this other, like I got a write-up in a magazine about it for like one of the top 10, whatever performance artists that were at Satellite. And I was like, how did that all happen from this little piece that I made from, so like, that's what I'm saying. You never know what's going to happen or what people will like,
yeah, you don't know. We don't know what's stupid.
Right.
Like I do that all the time. Like almost every single sculpture I've ever made came from a stupid idea.
Yeah.
But then I look at it in hindsight and I was just like, oh no, it's actually like kind of poignant and it resonates with a lot of people. So, I mean, perhaps people are stupid and that's why it resonates with us. I don't know.
Yeah. But then it became something much more meaningful to me too, right? Like the piece, I mean, when it first made, I was like, whatever, but now it became something much more meaningful. Now it's this other collaborative performance that's going to be shown at a different show, you know, coming up in New York this spring. So it's just like, it's so crazy to me, honestly, that piece.
So I would say, just to name your ritual, I would say it's actually applying to things.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes.
Which is really hard to do. So like,
and
kudos on sitting down at your computer and actually doing that.
I'll let you all know too that like, I mean, probably out of like 100 things I apply to, I probably get like 10 acceptances. So like, yeah, don't get discouraged because it happens to all of us. I get so
prepared to fail.
Yeah.
Over and over again. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for giving us that time and being willing to talk with us about your most recent work. I think that you spoke about it very eloquently. I know that this was relatively new work, and I think that it's really powerful to see, and I'm glad that you felt comfortable sharing that with us today. If anybody doesn't have any final questions, we will let Katina get on with the rest of her day, and we will then reconvene in our class meeting.
One quick question. Now, you kind of sort of covered it when you were talking about it. What do you think the hardest part of collaborating with someone is?
A difference of opinion and different artistic vision. Also being very clear that you're, let's say, like a specialist in your area, so that it doesn't seem like somebody can tell you what, like somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about can tell you what you're supposed to be doing. So I would say that's the hardest thing. And also, just like as we said, like some people work on deadlines, some people work way ahead of the deadline, some people work right up to the deadline. And so that difference in work ethic can be, not ethic, but work strategy can become frustrating too. So you just want to kind of lay out a plan ahead of time with your collaborator, set actual deadlines like with them so that you're all on the same page. And also, especially if there's money involved in if it's like a commission project that you're collaborating with, you want to make sure that all of that is set out ahead of time, like who's getting how much for what duties, or else it'll just turn into arguments later. So you just want to make sure that all of that is written down in a contract and all of that. And so also make sure it's somebody that you can also have fun with, right? I mean, because like, for example, for this trip, but I did spend quite a bit of time with this person, traveling with them and all of that good stuff. So you want to make sure it's somebody that you also just get along with outside of your artistic practice as well. Does that help?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Paperwork. There's a lot of paperwork involved.
That's something I'm slowly learning too, you know, like, oh wait, people should sign up and things. Oh wait, I should have a contract for that.
Contracts
are
very important. I learned that after moving to St. Louis and having a piece broken. So contracts are a thing. Well, once again, thank you so much for speaking with us today. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Yeah, you guys too. None of you guys are too far from Columbia, right? Because you all, I'm assuming, are living in St. Louis or around.
I think pretty much everybody's in the St. Louis greater metropolitan area. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you guys are ever want to stop by Columbia or anything, I'm nearby. So my email, or I don't think, here, let me put my email in the chat actually, in case you guys have questions for me. Also, if you all are undergrads, we do have an MFA program, just throwing it out there.
But to ask you if you had a graduate program.
We do. Unfortunately, the deadline just passed. It was January 18th. However, we're always looking for people. And actually, we've been recruiting a lot more if you work, especially in digital media, but we have a huge ceramics program, photo, everything. It's all very interdisciplinary though. So if you have any questions about either my work or about Mizzou, because I coordinate the program too, I'm happy to answer those for you. So that's my like work email.
Excellent. So in the chat, everybody copy, paste it down in case you're looking at going to grad school at Mizzou or just want to talk about stuff.
Yeah, anything. I'm open to chatting about everything. So.
All right. Okay. Well, Katina, thank you again. I'm going to let you go. Yep. I'm going to stop the recording and then have a brief conversation about rituals. We're going to continue that talk.
That's a good talk.
All right. Awesome.
All right.
Well,
take care.
We'll see you later.
Yep. Bye.